A simple man was just fixing his van. Oil-stained coveralls, rusty tools, and broken dreams on the side of a dusty road. Then a military convoy pulls up. Laughter. Mockery. Until a four-star general steps out, sees the tattoo, and salutes. The crowd goes silent. Why would one of the most powerful men in the military salute a nobody? What's this humble mechanic hiding? Why are powerful people suddenly trying to erase him? And how far will they go to bury a truth that could destroy everything? What happens when a forgotten hero refuses to stay hidden? Every time I see your comments, it reminds me how stories connect us all. Let me know where you're watching from, and let's get started. The late afternoon sun beat down on Highway 23, a lonely stretch of asphalt cutting through the dusty plains outside Fort Braxton. Ezekiel "Zeke" Washington stood hunched over the open hood of his repair van, his weathered hands carefully examining the engine. Wisps of steam rose from beneath the metal, carrying the acrid smell of burnt oil. Zeke wiped his brow with the back of his hand, leaving a dark smudge across his forehead. His once blue coveralls, now faded and stained from years of honest work, hung loosely on his tall frame. The name, Washington's Repairs, was barely legible on the patch above his chest pocket. "Come on, old girl," he muttered softly, his gentle voice carrying a note of concern. "Don't give up on me now." The van had been his livelihood for the past 8 years, helping him support his widowed sister and disabled niece. Every job mattered, and this breakdown couldn't have come at a worse time. The distant rumble of engines drew his attention. A convoy of 3 olive-drab Humvees approached, kicking up clouds of dust as they rolled to a stop about 50 yards away. The vehicles bore the distinctive insignia of the Fort Braxton Military Academy. Young cadets in crisp uniforms spilled out of the vehicles, their boots crunching on the gravel shoulder. They carried themselves with the overconfident bearing of those born into privilege, their backs straight and chins held high. "Well, well," the voice called out, dripping with disdain. "What do we have here?" Cadet Captain Bradford Hawthorne III stepped forward, his perfectly polished boots gleaming in the sunlight. His clean-shaven face wore an expression of barely concealed contempt as he surveyed Zeke in his broken-down van. "Sir," Zeke acknowledged quietly, returning his attention to the engine. He'd learned long ago that the best response to prejudice was dignity. "You're blocking our training route, old-timer," Hawthorne announced, drawing snickers from his fellow cadets. "This area is reserved for academy maneuvers." Zeke straightened up slowly, his tall frame unfolding to its full height. "This is a public highway, young man. I'll be on my way as soon as I can get her running." "Did you hear that?" Hawthorne turned to his companions with exaggerated surprise. "He'll be on his way when he's good and ready." More laughter followed, harder this time. Another cadet stepped forward, emboldened by his leader's example. "Maybe he's living in that heap. Looks like a vagrant to me." Zeke's hands tightened slightly on his wrench, but his face remained calm. He'd faced worse than these privileged boys during his time in Somalia. Their words were nothing compared to real combat. "Check out those coveralls," a third cadet chimed in. "I think my grandfather had something similar, back in the 1950s. Hawthorne circled the van, his boots clicking on the pavement. "Washington's Repairs," he read mockingly. "I bet that's a real thriving enterprise. Do you accept food stamps as payment?" The laughter grew louder, more cruel. Zeke continued working, his movements deliberate and measured. Each turn of the wrench was performed with the same careful precision he'd used to field strip his rifle in the Army. "I said you're in our way," Hawthorne repeated, his voice taking on a harder edge. "This is an official training exercise, and you're interfering with military operations." Zeke finally turned to face the young cadet captain, his gentle eyes meeting Hawthorne's stern glare. "Son, I respect the uniform you're wearing, but right now, you're not showing it the respect it deserves." A flash of anger crossed Hawthorne's face. "How dare you lecture me about respect? Do you have any idea who I am?" "I know exactly who you are," Zeke replied softly. "You're someone who thinks a uniform and a title make you better than others. I've known many like you." The other cadets had grown quiet, watching the exchange with growing tension. Hawthorne's face had reddened, his carefully maintained composure cracking. "Clear this wreck off our route in 10 minutes, he snapped, "or I'll have it towed and impounded." He spun on his heel and marched back to the lead Humvee, calling out, "Mount up! We're behind schedule thanks to this disruption." The cadets scrambled back into their vehicles, still shooting contemptuous glances at Zeke. The convoy's engines roared to life, and they pulled away in a cloud of dust and exhaust. Zeke watched them go, then returned to his work under the hood. His movements remained steady, unhurried, as he had learned through years of service that anger solved nothing. The sun continued its slow descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the highway, as he worked in solitude to bring his van back to life. The sun had shifted in the sky when a black SUV with military plates approached from the direction of Fort Braxton. Its polished surface gleamed as it rolled to a stop near the training convoy. The cadets immediately straightened their postures, recognizing the vehicle of a high-ranking officer. Four-star General Marcus Steele emerged from the SUV, his presence commanding immediate attention. His steel-gray hair caught the late afternoon light, and his uniform bore the weight of decades of service in its precisely arranged medals and ribbons. The cadets snapped to attention as he approached, their earlier mockery forgotten in the face of true authority. "At ease," General Steele said, his voice carrying the natural command of someone used to being obeyed without question. "Cadet Captain Hawthorne, report on the status of today's exercise." Bradford Hawthorne stepped forward, his earlier arrogance replaced by nervous energy. "Sir, we encountered a slight delay due to a civilian vehicle breakdown on our designated route. We're preparing to proceed with the planned maneuvers, sir." General Steele's eyes swept across the scene, landing on the figure still working beneath the hood of the repair van. His expression changed instantly, a flash of recognition crossing his face. Without a word, he strode purposefully toward Zeke's van, leaving the bewildered cadets behind. Zeke straightened up from his work, wiping his hands on a rag. As he turned to face the approaching general, Steele stopped dead in his tracks. In a move that shocked everyone present, the four-star general snapped to attention and rendered a crisp, formal salute. The cadets' jaws dropped. Several exchanged confused glances, unable to process what they were witnessing. A four-star general was saluting a mechanic in oil-stained coveralls. "Sergeant Washington," General Steele said, holding his salute. His voice carried a depth of respect that made the cadets shift uncomfortably. "It's been too long, sir." Zeke returned the salute with quiet dignity, his movement carrying an unmistakable military bearing that hadn't been visible moments before. "General Steele," he acknowledged softly. 25 years, I believe." The general's arm lowered slowly. 25 years, 3 months, and 16 days to be exact. I've counted every one of them. Behind them, the cadets remained frozen in disbelief. Hawthorne's face had drained of color as he watched the interaction. The same man he had mocked and threatened with impoundment was receiving a salute from one of the most decorated officers in the military. "Permission to speak privately, sir?" Zeke asked, his gentle voice carrying a new weight. "Of course," General Steele replied immediately. He turned to the stunned group of cadets. "Continue your exercise. I'll review your performance reports later." His tone made it clear this was not a moment they would want documented. The two men walked a short distance from the vehicles, their bearings suggesting a shared history that transcended their apparent differences. The cadets watched in stunned silence as General Steele and the mechanic they had ridiculed engaged in quiet conversation. "Did anyone know?" one cadet whispered to Hawthorne. "About him being a sergeant?" Hawthorne shook his head slowly, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. "That's not just any sergeant," he murmured, recognition finally dawning. "Look at how the general's treating him. This is something else entirely." The sun cast long shadows across the highway as the two men continued their private discussion. There was something in their posture, in the way they stood together, that spoke of shared experiences beyond the understanding of the young cadets watching them. Cadet Captain Hawthorne's hands trembled slightly as he realized the magnitude of his earlier behavior. He had just spent the last hour mocking someone who commanded the immediate respect of a four-star general, someone who was clearly much more than the humble mechanic he appeared to be. The other cadets shifted nervously, the weight of their previous actions settling heavily on their shoulders. The class distinctions that had seemed so clear and important just moments ago had been shattered by a single salute. General Steele finally nodded and clasped Zeke's hand firmly. The gesture carried meaning beyond a simple handshake. It was a sign of deep respect between equals, despite their different ranks and current stations in life. As they parted, Zeke returned to his van while the general walked back to the group of cadets. His face had taken on a stern expression that made them stand straighter. "Gentlemen," General Steele addressed them, his voice carrying an edge of steel, "I trust you'll remember this day the next time you're tempted to judge someone by their appearance." His eyes settled on Hawthorne. "A person's true worth isn't measured by their uniform or occupation, but by their actions and character." The cadets responded with a chorus of "Yes, sir," their voices carrying a new understanding of the lesson they'd just received. General Steele and Zeke walked away from the convoy until they were well out of earshot. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty ground as they found a quiet spot beside a weathered oak tree. For a moment, neither man spoke, both seeming to wrestle with the weight of shared memories. "I never thought I'd see you again, Sergeant," Steele finally said, his authoritative voice softening with emotion. "Not after all these years." Zeke leaned against the tree trunk, his quiet dignity unchanged despite the revelation of his military past. "I've been content staying out of sight, sir. Living a simple life has its own rewards." The general's face tightened with barely contained frustration. "A simple life? You should be living as the hero you are, not fixing cars on the side of the road." He gestured back toward the convoy. "Those cadets back there? They should be studying your actions in their tactical courses, not—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "Somalia," Steele continued, his voice dropping lower. 25 years ago, I still see it in my dreams sometimes. Our position overrun, communication lines cut, enemy forces closing in from 3 sides. We were as good as dead, all 38 of us." Zeke's weathered face remained calm, but his eyes carried a distant look. "We all did what we had to do that day, sir." "No," Steele said firmly. "We all fought, yes, but you, Sergeant Washington, you did the impossible." He turned to face Zeke directly. "When our defensive line collapsed, you single-handedly held the eastern approach. One man against an entire militia force, you gave us the time we needed to establish an evacuation route." The general's voice grew thick with emotion. "You coordinated the entire evacuation while under constant fire. You called in that precision airstrike on your own position for God's sake, to keep the enemy from overwhelming us. The pilots still talk about that call, though they never knew your name." Zeke shifted uncomfortably, his humility evident even in the face of such praise. "The mission was classified, sir. The details had to stay buried." "Yes, the mission was classified," Steele agreed. "But what happened afterward? That Medal of Honor ceremony in that underground bunker." He shook his head. "It wasn't right. A hero like you deserved more than a secret ceremony and a medal you can't even display." "The medal's not important," Zeke said softly. "Everyone made it home. That's what matters." "Everyone except you, not really," Steele countered. "That last burst of enemy fire when you were covering our final extraction. The doctors said you'd never walk normally again." Zeke unconsciously adjusted his stance, the slight unevenness in his gait barely noticeable to anyone who wasn't looking for it. "The medical discharge was necessary. I've made peace with it." "But you disappeared after that," Steele pressed. "Returned to civilian life without any recognition, without any of the honors you deserved. Do you know how many times I've wanted to tell your story? How many young soldiers could learn from your example?" "The mission remains classified, sir," Zeke reminded him gently. "Some secrets need to stay buried for the greater good." General Steele's shoulders slumped slightly. "You're still serving, aren't you? Even now, protecting the mission's secrecy at the cost of your own recognition." A small smile touched Zeke's lips. "I fix cars now, sir. Help people get back on their way. It's honest work." "It's not enough," Steele insisted. "Not for a Medal of Honor recipient. Not for the man who saved 38 lives through sheer force of will and tactical brilliance." "With all due respect, sir," Zeke said, his voice carrying quiet conviction. "It's exactly enough. I don't need recognition or glory. Never did. The medal stays in its box, the story stays classified, and life goes on." The general studied his former sergeant's face, seeing the same unwavering strength he'd witnessed in Somalia 25 years ago. "You're a better man than most, Sergeant Washington. Always were." "Just Zeke now, sir," he corrected gently. "Haven't been Sergeant Washington in a long time." General Steele straightened, his military bearing returning. "You'll always be Sergeant Washington to me, and whether you wear the medal or not, you remain one of the finest soldiers I've ever had the honor of serving with." The two men stood in companionable silence for a moment, the weight of their shared history hanging between them. The secret of Somalia, the hidden medal, the classified heroism. It was all part of who Zeke was, even if the world would never know. Cadet Captain Bradford Hawthorne III stood rigid with anger as he watched General Steele and the mechanic walk away. His face burned with the humiliation of witnessing a four-star general salute someone he'd just been mocking. The other cadets shifted uncomfortably around him, avoiding eye contact. "This has to be some kind of mistake," Hawthorne muttered through clenched teeth. His perfectly pressed uniform suddenly felt too tight around his neck. "There's no way that grease monkey is who the general thinks he is." Lieutenant Sarah Chen, his second in command, cleared her throat. "Sir, maybe we should focus on the training exercise." "No," Hawthorne cut her off sharply. "Something's not right here. A decorated general doesn't salute a common mechanic. It goes against everything we've learned about military protocol." He pulled out his phone, fingers flying across the screen. "I'm going to get to the bottom of this." Over the next few days, Hawthorne's obsession grew. He sat in his dormitory at Fort Braxton Military Academy, surrounded by stacks of printouts and his laptop. Dark circles formed under his eyes as he dug deeper into Ezekiel Washington's background. "Auto shop owner in Millbrook," he read aloud, scrolling through public records. "Washington's repairs and service. Barely staying afloat according to these tax records." He smiled grimly. Some war hero. But as he dug deeper, his frustration mounted. There were strange gaps in Washington's history, periods where the man seemed to vanish completely. The military records he could access showed only basic service dates, with huge sections either missing or classified. Hawthorne slammed his laptop shut. "This doesn't make any sense." The next morning, he drove his gleaming silver BMW into Millbrook. The town was small and worn around the edges, with faded storefronts and tired-looking buildings. Washington's auto shop sat on the outskirts, a modest concrete building with 2 service bays. The sign above needed repainting. Parking across the street, Hawthorne watched through his tinted windows. Zeke was working under the hood of an old pickup truck, his movements careful and methodical despite his slight limp. A young woman in a wheelchair rolled out of the office, bringing him a bottle of water. Hawthorne's eyes narrowed as he observed the interaction. The woman was in her early 20s, her wheelchair clearly well worn. Zeke's face softened as he spoke with her, revealing a gentleness that contradicted Hawthorne's image of a supposed war hero. Later that day at the local diner, Hawthorne casually questioned the waitress about the Washingtons. "Oh, that's Lisa, Zeke's niece," the waitress said as she refilled his coffee. "Sweet girl. Been in that wheelchair since the accident that took her daddy. Zeke's been taking care of her and his sister Maria ever since." "Must be difficult running a struggling business and supporting a family?" Hawthorne probed. The waitress's expression hardened slightly. "Zeke manages, never complains, never asks for help. Fixes folks' cars even when they can't pay right away. Man's got a heart of gold." Back in his car, Hawthorne made notes on his phone. "Lives with widowed sister Maria Washington and disabled niece Lisa. Business struggling but continues to operate. Provides primary financial support for family." He frowned. Where's the war hero in all this? Where's the man who supposedly earned General Steele's respect? He drove past the shop one more time. Through the open bay door, he could see Zeke working late, his shoulders stooped with exhaustion. Lisa sat nearby in her wheelchair, reading a book while keeping him company. The scene should have softened Hawthorne's heart, but it only hardened his resolve. His own father, a retired colonel, had always taught him that true military heroes carried themselves with pride and authority. They didn't hide in small-town garages or fix cars for people too poor to pay. "I'm going to expose whatever game you're playing, Washington," Hawthorne whispered as he drove away. "No real war hero would live like this. No Medal of Honor recipient would choose to be nobody." Back at the academy, Hawthorne created a detailed file on his investigation. Maps of Millbrook, photographs of the auto shop, financial records, and family information. All of it pointing to a simple mechanic living a humble life. Nothing suggested the distinguished military career General Steele had implied. "I'll find the truth," he promised himself, staring at the scattered evidence covering his desk. "And when I do, everyone will know that Ezekiel Washington is nothing but a fraud who somehow fooled a general." But deep down, something nagged at him. The gaps in Washington's history, the classified records, the way the man carried himself with quiet dignity despite his circumstances, the dedication to his family. None of it fit neatly into Hawthorne's theory of deception. Still, his pride wouldn't let him accept the alternative, that he had gravely misjudged and disrespected a genuine hero. The humiliation of that possibility was too much to bear. He would prove himself right no matter what it took. Colonel Bradford Hawthorne II sat behind his mahogany desk in the family estate, his steel gray eyes fixed on his son. The younger Hawthorne had just finished explaining the incident with General Steele and the mechanic, his voice tight with wounded pride. "So this mechanic made you look foolish in front of your entire command?" The elder Hawthorne's fingers drummed against his desk, each tap echoing in the book-lined study. "Father, there's no way he could be who General Steele claims. A Medal of Honor recipient working as a small-town mechanic? It doesn't make sense." Bradford III paced the Persian carpet, his academy uniform perfectly pressed despite his agitation. Colonel Hawthorne leaned back in his leather chair. "You understand what this could mean for your future career? Your authority has been undermined. The other cadets witnessed your humiliation." "I've been investigating him," Bradford said, spreading out his research across the desk. "Ezekiel Washington runs a failing auto shop in Millbrook, supports his sister and disabled niece. Nothing about him suggests military honors." The colonel picked up one of the papers, studying it carefully. "Hawthorne Defense Industries has several major contracts pending with Fort Braxton. We can't afford any complications. That might affect our family's standing with the military establishment." He pressed a button on his desk phone. "Janet, get me Senator Morrison's office and contact Thomas at the records department. Tell him it's regarding a sensitive military personnel matter." Bradford watched his father work, amazed at how quickly things began moving. Within hours, wheels were turning in Washington, D.C. The colonel's network of influence, built over decades of military contracts and political donations, sprang into action. "We're not just protecting your reputation, son," the colonel explained, hanging up after his third phone call. "We're protecting the integrity of the military honor system itself. If this Washington fellow is perpetrating some kind of fraud, it's our duty to expose it." In a private room at the Capitol Hill Club, Senator Morrison met with Colonel Hawthorne over expensive scotch. "The timing works in our favor," the senator said, swirling his drink. "There's been growing concern about stolen valor cases. The media loves these stories." The colonel nodded. "We need to handle this carefully. Start with whispers, questions, plant seeds of doubt." "I know just the reporter at the Military Times," Morrison replied. "Always eager for a scandal. We'll start with subtle inquiries about Washington's service record." Back at Fort Braxton, Bradford noticed how quickly the rumors spread. Cadets whispered in the halls about the mechanic who had fooled General Steele. Someone leaked a document suggesting irregularities in Washington's discharge papers. The document was fake, carefully crafted by one of the colonel's connections, but it looked authentic enough to raise questions. "Did you hear about the mechanic?" Bradford overheard one cadet telling another in the mess hall. "Apparently, there are serious questions about his service record. Someone said he might have been dishonorably discharged." The colonel's influence reached deeper into the military bureaucracy. Thomas, his contact in records, began inserting small discrepancies into Washington's file. Nothing obvious, just enough inconsistencies to support a narrative of deception. The key is plausible deniability, the colonel explained to his son during a private dinner. We're not making direct accusations. We're simply raising questions that need to be answered. Bradford watched in awe as his father orchestrated the campaign. Anonymous tips reached military investigators. Questions about Washington's service dates appeared in official inquiries. The colonel's network of influence worked like a well-oiled machine, each piece moving in perfect coordination. "What about General Steele?" Bradford asked. "He clearly knows something about Washington's service." The colonel smiled thinly. "The general is close to retirement. His memory of events from 25 years ago might be questioned, especially if other evidence suggests he was mistaken." The conspiracy grew more sophisticated. The colonel's contacts began a thorough examination of Washington's finances, looking for any irregularity they could exploit. They discovered the struggling auto shop's tax problems, late payments on equipment loans, and the medical bills for his niece. "Every piece adds to the picture," the colonel said, reviewing the gathered information. "A man in financial trouble, possibly desperate enough to fabricate a military record for attention or gain." Senator Morrison arranged for a preliminary investigation into stolen valor claims in the Fort Braxton area. While Washington wasn't named directly, the timing and location made the target clear. "The beauty of it," Morrison explained during another private meeting, "is that once the questions are raised, the burden of proof falls on him. And with the adjustments we've made to his records, that proof will be hard to provide." Bradford felt a surge of satisfaction as the plot unfolded. His initial humiliation was transforming into a crusade to protect military honors from a suspected fraud. The fact that this crusade would restore his reputation and please his father made it even more satisfying. "Remember," his father advised, "we're not just defending our family name. We're performing a public service, exposing someone who would dare to claim unearned military honors." The campaign against Ezekiel Washington was now fully launched, moving from personal vendetta to a coordinated attack involving some of the most powerful people in Washington, D.C. The humble mechanic had no idea that while he worked on cars in his small-town garage, forces were aligning to destroy everything he had built. The Millbrook Gazette's headline screamed across the front page, "Local Mechanics Military Claims Questioned." Below it, a grainy photo showed Zeke working on a car, his expression focused and unaware of the camera. The article, written by an ambitious young reporter named Dave Miller, carefully wove together the manufactured evidence provided by the Hawthorne's network. Sarah Chen, Zeke's regular customer of 5 years, placed the newspaper on his shop counter. "I'm sorry, Zeke, but I'll be taking my business elsewhere." Her eyes wouldn't meet his. "My husband's a veteran. We take stolen valor very seriously." Zeke's weathered hands gripped the edge of the counter. "Mrs. Chen, I've never lied about my service." His voice remained gentle, even as she turned and walked out of his shop. The phone started ringing less. The appointment book grew empty. Each morning, Zeke opened his shop to find fewer customers waiting. Some days, nobody came at all. At home, bills piled up on his kitchen table. His sister Janet's medical bills from her cancer treatments topped $3,000. His niece Melissa's physical therapy for her cerebral palsy added another $2,000 each month. Zeke stared at the numbers until they blurred together. The stories spread through town like wildfire. The Gazette published follow-up articles, each one more damaging than the last. "Military records show discrepancies," one headline declared. "Anonymous sources question Washington's service claims," read another. At the local diner where Zeke had eaten breakfast every Sunday for 10 years, conversation stopped when he walked in. Old friends suddenly found reasons to sit at other tables. The waitress who had always called him honey now barely spoke while taking his order. One morning, Zeke arrived at his shop to find "Fake Hero" spray-painted across his garage door in bright red letters. He cleaned it off without a word, his movements methodical and determined. But the next day, someone had thrown eggs at the windows. "I don't understand," Janet said one evening, her voice weak from chemotherapy. She sat at their small dining table, pushing food around her plate. "Why would anyone believe these lies about you?" Zeke watched Melissa struggling with her fork, her hands shaking from her condition. People believe what they want to believe, sis, especially when it comes from authority figures. The bank called about missed payments on his equipment loans. His landlord left messages about late rent. Each day brought new financial pressures while the income from his shop dwindled to almost nothing. At the grocery store, a man in a veteran's cap confronted him in the cereal aisle. "You ought to be ashamed," the man spat. "Real heroes died for this country, and you're playing dress-up for attention." Zeke simply walked away, but the man's words followed him home. That night, he took out his Medal of Honor, stored in a simple wooden box in his closet. The medal's weight felt heavy in his hands, a reminder of that terrible day in Somalia when he'd chosen duty over safety. The financial strain began showing in small ways. He switched to cheaper brands at the grocery store. He cut back on his own meals to ensure Melissa got enough to eat. He started doing oil changes in customers' driveways at discount rates, trying to earn whatever he could. Janet found him one night at the kitchen table, surrounded by bills and past due notices. "Maybe we should sell the house," she suggested quietly. "This is your home," Zeke replied firmly. "You and Melissa need stability. We'll figure something out." But the next morning brought more cancellations. A longtime customer named Bob Parker called to explain. "Look, Zeke, you've always done right by me, but my son's in the Marines, and these stories about you, I just can't support someone who'd lie about serving." "I understand, Bob," Zeke said, his voice steady despite the pain. "You've got to do what you think is right." The pressure mounted as weeks passed. Janet's doctor recommended a new treatment that would cost $5,000. Melissa's therapist suggested additional sessions that insurance wouldn't cover. The shop's utility bills went unpaid, and the power company sent shutdown notices. Zeke started selling his tools one by one. Each sale felt like losing a piece of himself, but he had no choice. The money from his savings account had run dry, and the shop's checking account showed a negative balance. One afternoon, he found Janet crying over bills at the kitchen table. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "If it wasn't for us, you wouldn't be in this situation." Zeke wrapped his arms around his sister's thin shoulders. "Family takes care of family," he said firmly. "That's all there is to it." But later that night, alone in his room, Zeke allowed himself a moment of despair. The weight of responsibility, the constant struggle, and the community's rejection pressed down on him like a physical force. He thought about the classified nature of his mission in Somalia, how the very secrecy that had been necessary now prevented him from defending himself. The next morning's mail brought more overdue notices, more bills, and another copy of the Gazette with yet another damaging story. The systematic destruction of his reputation was nearly complete, and with it, his ability to provide for the people who depended on him hung by a thread. Isabella Martinez drummed her fingers on her desk at the Fort Braxton Military History Center, frowning at the latest Millbrook Gazette article about Zeke Washington. Something about the story didn't add up. After 15 years of researching military history and writing about veterans, she'd developed a keen sense for detecting inconsistencies. "The timeline's wrong," she muttered, spreading out newspaper clippings across her desk. The dates cited for Zeke's alleged dishonorable discharge conflicted with documented military operations in Somalia. She'd been tracking these discrepancies for weeks, gathering evidence that pointed to deliberate manipulation. Isabella pulled her dark hair into a neat bun and grabbed her laptop. The military historian in her couldn't ignore the mounting evidence of a smear campaign. As she drove to Zeke's auto shop, she rehearsed her approach. She'd interviewed countless veterans over the years, but something about this case felt different. The shop's parking lot was empty when she arrived. Through the garage door, she saw a tall man in oil-stained coveralls working alone on an old pickup truck. He looked up as she approached, his eyes carrying a wariness she'd seen in many veterans who'd been through trauma. "Mr. Washington?" Isabella stepped forward, extending her hand. "I'm Isabella Martinez from the Fort Braxton Military History Center. I'd like to talk to you about these allegations." Zeke wiped his hands on a shop rag before shaking hers. "Not much to talk about, ma'am. Seems like everyone's made up their minds." "I haven't." Isabella met his gaze directly. "I've spent my career studying military history, and these accusations don't match the facts. Would you be willing to tell me your side?" Something shifted in Zeke's expression, a flicker of hope quickly masked by caution. He gestured to a pair of folding chairs near his workbench. As they sat, Isabella noticed the precise way he arranged his tools, a habit common among military veterans. "The mission was classified," Zeke began slowly. "There's not much I can say." "I understand." Isabella opened her laptop. "But there are other ways to verify service records. May I show you what I found?" For the next hour, they pored over her research. Isabella explained the inconsistencies she'd discovered, the mismatched dates, the suspicious patterns in the documentation. Zeke listened intently, occasionally offering small details that confirmed her theories. "Someone went to a lot of trouble to discredit you," Isabella said, watching his reaction. "The question is why?" Zeke's shoulders tensed. Cadet Captain Bradford Hawthorne III and his father seemed to have taken a particular interest in my reputation. Isabella's eyes widened. "The defense contractor Hawthorne's? That explains the level of coordination in these attacks." She leaned forward, her professional interest suddenly becoming more personal. "Mr. Washington, I believe you're being systematically targeted, and I want to help." "Why?" Zeke's question was simple but loaded with meaning. "Because the truth matters," Isabella replied, "and because I've interviewed hundreds of veterans, but none quite like you." A slight blush colored her cheeks as she added, "There's an integrity in how you're handling this that speaks volumes." Over the next few weeks, Isabella became a regular visitor to the shop. She brought coffee and documentation, helping Zeke piece together a defense against the allegations. Their conversations gradually expanded beyond the case, revealing shared values and unexpected connections. "My grandfather was a mechanic too," Isabella mentioned one afternoon, watching Zeke work on a car while they talked. "He taught me that fixing things takes patience and honesty. You can't cut corners with engines." "Wise man," Zeke smiled, the expression warming his usually serious face. "Sounds like he and I would have gotten along." Their growing friendship provided Zeke with something he'd been missing since the accusations began, someone who believed in him without reservation. Isabella's presence brought a lightness to the shop that had been absent for months. She noticed the small ways he helped others despite his own troubles, fixing a single mother's car at cost, hiring a struggling veteran as a part-time helper, always making time to check on elderly customers' vehicles. "You know," Isabella said one evening as they reviewed more documents, "most people would be bitter after everything you've been through, but you're still helping others." Zeke paused in his work, looking at her thoughtfully. "Bitterness doesn't fix anything. Never has." Isabella felt her heart skip at the quiet strength in his words. She'd come to admire not just his resilience, but the fundamental decency that guided his actions. Their eyes met across the workbench, and something unspoken passed between them. A recognition of deeper feelings neither had expected to develop. "We're going to clear your name," Isabella promised, her hand briefly touching his arm. "I've got more sources to contact, and my editor at the Military History Quarterly is interested in the story. The truth will come out." For the first time in months, real hope flickered in Zeke's eyes. "Thank you, Isabella, for believing in me when no one else would." The moment lingered between them, full of possibility and unspoken emotions. Isabella's professional mission to uncover the truth had evolved into something more personal, something that made her heart race whenever Zeke smiled at her. She'd come looking for a story but found instead a man whose quiet dignity and unwavering principles had captured her heart. Bradford Hawthorne Sr. paced in his mahogany-paneled office, his polished leather shoes clicking against the hardwood floor. "That mechanic is becoming more trouble than he's worth," he growled into his phone. "Time to end this circus before he damages our reputation further." The next morning, 2 police cruisers pulled up to Zeke's auto shop. Officers approached with hands on their weapons, citing reports of stolen car parts and fraudulent business practices. Isabella, who had arrived early to continue their investigation, watched in horror as they produced a warrant. "This is ridiculous," she protested, holding up her press credentials. "I've been investigating Mr. Washington's case. These charges are clearly fabricated. The officers conducted their search while Zeke stood quietly, his dignity intact despite the humiliation. They found nothing, but the damage was done. Customers driving by saw the police presence, and word would spread quickly in the small town. Later that afternoon, as the sun began to set, Isabella was helping Zeke document the morning's events when 3 black SUVs pulled into the shop's parking lot. 6 men in expensive suits emerged, their body language telegraphing threat. "Shop's closed," Zeke called out, stepping protectively in front of Isabella. The lead man, a burly figure with a scarred face, smiled without warmth. "We're not here for car repairs, Washington. Mr. Hawthorne sends his regards, and a message." Isabella reached for her phone, but one of the men moved with surprising speed, knocking it from her hand. The others spread out, creating a semicircle around Zeke and Isabella. "Last chance to walk away," Zeke said quietly, his voice carrying the same calm authority that had once commanded troops in combat. The men attacked as one. Isabella watched in amazement as Zeke's humble mechanic persona fell away, replaced by fluid, precise movements she'd only seen in military combat footage. He deflected the first attacker's punch, using the man's momentum to send him crashing into a tool cabinet. 2 more rushed him simultaneously. Zeke's movements were economical and devastating. No wasted motion, no flashy techniques, just the brutal efficiency of a trained soldier protecting what mattered. One attacker went down clutching his knee. Another found himself suddenly airborne before meeting the concrete floor. The leader pulled a knife, its blade glinting in the shop's fluorescent lights. Isabella screamed a warning, but Zeke had already seen it. He grabbed a nearby wrench, deflecting the knife thrust with its metal surface before delivering a precise strike that left the man gasping on the ground. The remaining thugs hesitated, clearly unprepared for this level of resistance. The sound of approaching sirens, likely called by concerned neighbors, made their decision easier. They retreated to their vehicles, dragging their injured companions. "This isn't over," the leader spat blood as he stumbled away. Isabella rushed to Zeke's side, noting how he was already shifting back into his usual calm demeanor, though his eyes still scanned for threats. "Are you all right?" she asked, touching his arm. "Fine," he replied, then looked at her with concern. "You?" Before she could answer, phone cameras flashed from across the street. Isabella's heart sank as she recognized one of the Millbrook Gazette's photographers. She could already imagine tomorrow's headlines. Her fears proved correct. The next morning's paper screamed, "Accused Valor Thief Attacks Businessmen. Violence Erupts at Local Auto Shop." The article, clearly influenced by the Hawthorns, painted Zeke as an unstable element in their peaceful community. Photos of the aftermath, carefully framed to show the shop's disarray, and injured men being helped to their vehicles, supported the false narrative. "They planned this," Isabella said, pacing Zeke's office while clutching the newspaper. "Those men were professionals, probably ex-military themselves. The Hawthorns wanted you to fight back. They're using your skills against you." Zeke stood at his office window watching customers cancel their appointments and drive away. 25 years of keeping those skills hidden," he said softly. "Never wanted to be seen as a weapon. Just wanted to fix cars and take care of my family." Isabella moved beside him, her hand finding his. "Your skills protected us both yesterday. There's no shame in that." "The Hawthorns don't care about shame," Zeke replied. "They're trying to push me out, make me look dangerous. And it's working." He gestured to his empty parking lot. "Who's going to trust their car to someone they think might snap at any moment?" "We'll fight this," Isabella insisted. "I've got photos of those men arriving, proof they initiated the confrontation." My editor dash. A brick crashed through the office window, forcing them to jump back. Attached was a note. "Leave town, or the next attack won't be a warning." Zeke picked up the brick, his expression grim. The stakes had shifted. This was no longer just about his reputation or business. The Hawthorns had escalated to physical violence, and they wouldn't stop until they achieved their goal. He looked at Isabella, seeing the same realization in her eyes. This had become a fight for survival. Isabella Martinez sat in her dimly lit home office, surrounded by stacks of military documents and archived newspapers. Her laptop screen cast a blue glow across her tired face, as she cross-referenced deployment records with equipment contracts. 3 empty coffee cups testified to her determination to uncover the truth. "This can't be right," she muttered, double-checking the dates. But the evidence was undeniable. She grabbed her phone and dialed Zeke's number with trembling fingers. "You need to see this," she said when he answered. "Can you come over?" "Now." 30 minutes later, Zeke stood behind Isabella's chair, his usually calm demeanor shaken as she walked him through her findings. The documents on her screen told a devastating story of corruption and cover-ups. The Hawthorne Defense Corporation supplied body armor to troops in Somalia in 1998, Isabella explained, pulling up scanned contracts. "But look at these internal quality control reports." She pointed to highlighted sections. "They knew the armor was defective, they shipped it anyway." Zeke's hands gripped the back of her chair. "That mission," he said quietly. "We lost good men because their armor failed." Isabella swiveled to face him. "The same mission where you earned the Medal of Honor. The Hawthorne's defective equipment created the crisis you had to solve." She pulled up more documents. "They made millions on those contracts, Zeke. Millions of dollars built on American soldiers' blood." "And now they're afraid I'll remember," Zeke said, the pieces falling into place, "that I'll connect their name to that equipment." "It's worse," Isabella continued, opening another file. "Bradford Hawthorne Sr. personally signed off on these shipments. He knew they were sending our troops into combat with faulty protection. If this gets out, it's not just bad publicity, it's criminal charges." Zeke paced the small office, his mind racing back to that terrible day in Somalia. "We need to take this to General Steele." "Already ahead of you," Isabella replied, reaching for her phone. But before she could dial, her computer screen flickered and went dark. "No, no, no!" She frantically pressed keys, but the machine remained dead. "Someone's watching," Zeke said grimly. "We need to move, now." They quickly gathered the physical documents and rushed to Isabella's car. As they pulled away from her house, 2 black SUVs appeared in her rearview mirror. "The Hawthornes must have monitored your research," Zeke said, watching the vehicles gain ground. "Head for Fort Braxton. General Steele needs to see this evidence." Isabella navigated through the darkened streets, her hands steady on the wheel despite her racing heart. The SUVs stayed close, trying to box them in. "They can't touch us on base," she said, pressing the accelerator. They made it to Fort Braxton's main gate with minutes to spare. The guards, recognizing Zeke from the recent media coverage, almost denied them entry until Zeke mentioned General Steele's name. They were escorted directly to the general's office where they found him working late. "Sir," Zeke said, standing at attention, "we've uncovered something you need to see." General Steele listened intently as Isabella laid out her evidence. His face grew increasingly grave as she connected the dots between the Hawthornes' war profiteering and their current campaign against Zeke. "This explains their desperation," Steele said, examining the documents. "They're not just protecting their reputation, they're avoiding prison." He looked up at Zeke. "They knew you were there. They knew you might remember the equipment failures." What they didn't count on, Isabella added, was a journalist digging into their past contracts while investigating their smear campaign. General Steele stood and walked to his window, his reflection sharp in the dark glass. "You understand what you're asking? Going public with this means taking on one of the largest defense contractors in the country. They have friends in Washington, connections that go all the way to the Pentagon." "With respect, sir," Zeke said quietly, "we lost 8 good men that day because of their greed. We owe them the truth." The general turned, his expression resolute. "You're right, Sergeant Washington." He reached for his phone. "I've got 25 years of my own to make right. It's time everyone knew what really happened in Somalia." He paused, his hand on the receiver. "This will end my career. The political fallout alone." "Sir," Zeke started, but Steele held up his hand. "Don't, Sergeant. You saved my life and the lives of everyone else who made it out that day. You've carried this burden in silence while these vultures got rich. It's my turn to stand up and do what's right." Isabella watched the 2 men, seeing decades of shared history and unspoken understanding pass between them. The general's decision to risk everything would change all their lives forever. But in that moment, She saw only relief on both men's faces, the relief of finally being able to tell the truth. General Steele picked up his phone and began dialing. "Get me the Secretary of Defense," he said firmly. "Priority code Alpha 7. Tell him it's about Somalia, 1998, and the Hawthorns." The morning sun cast long shadows across the mountain road as Zeke's repair van climbed steadily upward. He was heading to an emergency call at a remote cabin, though something about the urgent request had felt off. 25 years of military training had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now they were screaming at him. He checked his rearview mirror for the 10th time, noting the steep drop-off to his right. The guardrail offered little comfort against the 100-foot plunge into the ravine below. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as he approached another sharp curve. When he pressed the brake pedal, his heart stopped. The pedal went straight to the floor with no resistance. "No, no, no," he muttered, pumping the pedal frantically. Nothing. His mind flashed to his last maintenance check. He'd done it himself just 2 days ago. Everything had been perfect. The van picked up speed as the road tilted downward. Zeke's military training kicked in, his mind clearing as adrenaline flooded his system. He downshifted quickly, using the engine to slow the vehicle. It helped, but not enough. The next curve was approaching fast. He yanked the emergency brake. It too went slack in his hand, clearly sabotaged. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he realized this was no accident. The Hawthorns had escalated from character assassination to attempted murder. The van careened around another bend, metal scraping against the guardrail. Sparks flew as Zeke fought to keep control. He spotted a runaway truck ramp ahead, but it was filled with maintenance vehicles. Taking it would mean plowing into them at full speed. His mind raced through options. The next curve was too sharp. He'd never make it. The drop-off to his right meant certain death. To his left was a steep uphill slope covered in brush and small trees. Zeke made his choice. Just before the curve, he cranked the wheel hard left, aiming for the slope. The van left the road at nearly 50 miles per hour, smashing through undergrowth. The impact threw him against his seatbelt as the vehicle began to roll. The world spun violently. Glass shattered. Metal screamed. Each impact felt like a sledgehammer to his body. When the van finally came to rest on its side, Zeke hung suspended in his seatbelt, fighting to stay conscious. Smoke filled the cabin. He could smell gasoline. With shaking hands, he released his seatbelt, falling awkwardly onto the passenger door. Pain shot through his left arm, probably broken. Blood dripped from a gash on his forehead, but he forced himself to focus. The driver's door was crumpled shut above him. He kicked out what remained of the windshield and pulled himself through, ignoring the glass that cut into his hands. He'd barely cleared the van when the first flames appeared under the hood. Zeke stumbled away from the wreck, each step sending waves of pain through his battered body. He made it about 50 feet before his legs gave out. Collapsing against a tree, he watched as his van erupted into flames. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard vehicles approaching on the road above. Help already? No, too quick. He forced himself to move, hiding behind a large boulder just as 2 black SUVs stopped at the crash site. "Check the wreck," a familiar voice shouted. Bradford Hawthorne Sr. "I want to see a body." Zeke reached for his phone with his good hand. It was crushed, but as he shifted position, he felt something in his pocket, his small voice recorder. He'd started carrying it after Isabella suggested documenting any interactions with the Hawthorns. With trembling fingers, he pressed record. "Sir, the van's completely engulfed," one of Hawthorne's men reported. "No way anyone survived that." "Make sure," Hawthorne shouted. "This has to look like an accident. Washington knows too much about Somalia, about the armor contracts. He dies today. Understood?" Zeke held perfectly still, controlling his breathing despite the pain racking his body. The confession was being recorded. Finally, concrete evidence of their crimes. "What about the journalist?" another voice asked. "Martinez is next," Hawthorne replied. "Once Washington's dead, we'll deal with her. Make it look like a break-in gone wrong." Footsteps crunched through the underbrush. They were searching the crash site. Zeke knew he couldn't stay hidden for long, not with his injuries. He needed a distraction. Using his good arm, he picked up a rock and threw it far to his left. The sound of it crashing through branches drew their attention. "Over there!" someone shouted. While they investigated the noise, Zeke began moving slowly to his right, staying low and using the terrain for cover. Each movement was agony, but he forced himself to continue. He had to survive, had to protect Isabella, had to expose the truth. He heard their shouts of frustration as they found nothing. More vehicles were approaching, real emergency responders this time, drawn by the smoke visible for miles. "We need to go," Hawthorne ordered. "The police will be here soon. Washington's dead. That's what matters." Zeke waited until he heard their vehicles drive away before allowing himself to collapse. He clutched the voice recorder, now containing damning evidence of the Hawthorne's crimes. Help was coming. He just had to hold on. His last thought before losing consciousness was of Isabella. He had to warn her, had to keep her safe. The recorder in his hand held the key to bringing down the entire Hawthorne conspiracy, if he could survive long enough to use it. The Fort Braxton Memorial Auditorium buzzed with anticipation. Rows of dress uniforms filled the front seats, while reporters and civilians packed the rest of the hall. At the center of the stage stood General Marcus Steele, his face etched with determination. Zeke sat in the front row, his left arm still in a cast. Isabella squeezed his good hand reassuringly. 3 weeks had passed since the Mountain Road assassination attempt, but his body still ached from the injuries. The physical pain was nothing compared to the weight of anticipation he felt now. 25 years ago, General Steele's voice boomed through the auditorium. "I witnessed true heroism in Somalia. Today, we right a wrong that has gone on far too long." The general gestured to the side of the stage where 6 middle-aged men in military dress uniforms stood at attention. "These men are the survivors of that classified mission. They're alive today because of one man's extraordinary courage, Sergeant Ezekiel Washington." A murmur rippled through the crowd. General Steele continued, "For decades, the classified nature of that operation prevented us from publicly acknowledging his Medal of Honor. That changes today." The general's eyes found Bradford Hawthorne Sr. in the audience, now flanked by federal agents. Recent events have made it clear why certain parties wanted this story buried. "Ms. Isabella Martinez, please present your findings." Isabella rose and walked to the podium carrying a thick folder. Her voice was steady as she addressed the crowd. "My investigation uncovered evidence of systematic war profiteering by Hawthorne Defense Industries during the Somalia conflict. They knowingly supplied defective body armor to our troops, leading to multiple casualties." She held up documents. These internal memos proved they were aware of the armor's failures but continued shipping it to save money. The very battle where Sergeant Washington became a hero was precipitated by these defective supplies. The audience erupted in angry whispers. Bradford Hawthorne Sr.'s face had turned ashen. His son, the cadet captain, stared at the floor in shame. "Furthermore," Isabella continued, "when Sergeant Washington's identity threatened to expose their crimes, the Hawthornes orchestrated a campaign to destroy his reputation. This culminated in a deliberate attempt on his life." She played the recording from Zeke's voice recorder. Hawthorne Sr.'s voice filled the auditorium, clear and damning. "Washington knows too much about Somalia, about the armor contracts. He dies today, understood?" Federal agents moved to stand behind both Hawthornes. The elder's shoulders slumped in defeat, while his son looked like he might be sick. General Steele returned to the podium. "Sergeant Washington's Medal of Honor citation will now be read in full, and his service record made public. But first..." He turned to face Zeke directly. "Stand up, Sergeant." Zeke rose slowly, his injuries making him wince. The 6 men on stage snapped to attention and saluted. One by one, they descended the stairs to approach him. "Sir," the first man said, his voice thick with emotion, "I never got to thank you. My children exist because you saved my life that day." Each survivor embraced Zeke, sharing similar sentiments. Many had tears in their eyes. The audience watched in respectful silence as 25 years of hidden gratitude finally found expression. The last man pressed something into Zeke's hand, a battered dog tag. "You gave me this for luck before the evacuation. Said you wanted it back someday. Well, today's that day, sir." Zeke closed his fingers around the tag, his own eyes growing moist. These men had carried the truth for so long, unable to speak it. General Steele's voice cut through the emotion. Federal agents are now taking Bradford Hawthorne Sr. and Jr. into custody. They will face charges of war profiteering, fraud, attempted murder, and conspiracy. The Hawthornes were led away in handcuffs, their empire crumbling around them. The elder's face was a mask of rage, while the younger man seemed to have aged 10 years in the past hour. And now, General Steele said, we present the Medal of Honor citation for Sergeant Ezekiel Washington. His actions in Somalia on that classified mission can finally be shared with the world. As the general read the citation, detailing Zeke's incredible bravery in holding off enemy forces while organizing an impossible evacuation, the audience sat spellbound. The full story of his heroism, hidden for so long, finally echoed through the hall. Zeke stood straight despite his injuries, Isabella beside him, as the truth washed away years of forced silence. His quiet dignity in the face of persecution had never wavered. Now that same dignity marked his vindication. The citation concluded to thunderous applause. General Steele approached Zeke with a fresh Medal of Honor, replacing the one that had been awarded in secret decades ago. As he pinned it to Zeke's chest, the general whispered, "Long overdue, my friend." Long overdue. The standing ovation lasted for 10 minutes. Reporters rushed to capture the moment when Zeke's surviving platoon members gathered around him for a photo, their respect and gratitude plain for all to see. The truth had finally emerged, justice had been served, and a hero's honor had been restored. 3 months after the public vindication, Zeke stood in front of his auto shop, admiring the fresh paint and new sign. Washington's Auto Service and Veterans Workshop gleamed in bold letters against the morning sun. The parking lot was already full, a mix of cars waiting for repair and veterans' vehicles who had come for his weekly mentoring session. Inside the newly expanded workshop, Isabella was setting up coffee and donuts for the morning meeting. She caught his eye and smiled warmly, the engagement ring on her finger catching the light. Their relationship had blossomed in the aftermath of the Hawthorne scandal, built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared values. "Looking sharp, boss," called Mike, one of his new mechanics. The young Marine veteran had been among the first to join Zeke's expanding team. What had started as casual conversations about transitioning to civilian life had grown into a formal mentorship program. The sound of familiar laughter drew Zeke's attention to the entrance. General Steele walked in, accompanied by 2 of Zeke's former platoon members, Dave Wilson and James Rodriguez. They had been making regular visits since the vindication ceremony, helping rebuild the brotherhood that had been forced apart by secrecy for so many years. "The place looks better every time I visit," General Steele said, clasping Zeke's hand. "How many veterans are you mentoring now?" 15 active participants, Zeke replied, leading them to the new community room he had built onto the shop, plus another 10 who drop in when they can. Most importantly, we've helped 8 of them find steady jobs in the past 2 months. The room filled quickly with veterans of various ages. Some bore visible wounds, others carried invisible scars, but all shared the common challenge of finding their place in civilian life. Zeke had been there himself, and now he could finally use his experience to help others. "Before we start today's session," Zeke addressed the group, "I want to share some news. The county has approved our grant application. Starting next month, we'll be able to offer free basic auto repair certification courses for veterans." A round of applause filled the room. Isabella squeezed his hand proudly. She had helped write the grant proposal, using her journalism skills to make their case compelling. "That's not all," General Steele stood up. "The Military Academy Board has approved your appointment as a special advisor for their civilian transition program. You'll be able to reach cadets before they even enter service, helping them understand what comes after." Zeke nodded gratefully. It felt right, turning his past pain into purpose. The very institution where his recent troubles had begun would now become part of his mission to help others. Dave Wilson spoke up from the back. "Remember how lost we all felt after Somalia? Zeke, you were dealing with a career-ending injury, and you still found time to help us cope. You've always been a natural mentor, brother." The morning session proceeded with discussions about job hunting, dealing with PTSD and practical skills for civilian life. Zeke moved among the groups, sharing his experience and listening to their stories. Each veteran's journey was unique, but the common threads of struggle and hope bound them together. During a break, Isabella pulled him aside. The local paper wants to do a feature story on the mentorship program. They're calling it From Hidden Hero to Community Leader. What do you think? Zeke smiled. As long as it helps spread the word to veterans who need support, I'm in. No more hiding. The afternoon brought a steady stream of regular customers to the auto shop. The community that had once shunned him during the Hawthorne scandal now showed unwavering support. His appointment book was full weeks in advance, and he had hired 3 additional mechanics to handle the workload. As the day wound down, Zeke found himself in his office looking at photos on the wall. There was one from his Medal of Honor ceremony 3 months ago, another of him and Isabella at their engagement party, and several of successful mentorship program graduates. Next to these hung his old dog tags, returned by his platoon member, a reminder of where this journey had begun. General Steele appeared in the doorway. You've built something special here, Zeke. Not just a business or a program, but a community. Couldn't have done it without all of you, Zeke replied. The support, the trust, the second chances, it all matters. That's what real heroes do, Isabella added, joining them. They lift others up. Through the window, Zeke watched as veteran mentees helped close up the shop for the day, joking and working together like old friends. The isolation of his past had been replaced by genuine connections. His secret burden had transformed into an open source of strength for others. The evening sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as the last of the day's visitors departed. Zeke stood with Isabella, watching his expanded family of veterans, mechanics, and supporters head home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities to serve, and for the first time in 25 years, he felt completely at peace with his place in the world. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.